All right, welcome everybody. Very glad to see you. Thank you for coming today, for your hunger in God's Word. We're going to keep going with our study in the book of Acts, which is such a critical book. It transitions from the Gospels to what we start reading in the epistles there. If you didn't have the book of Acts, look at how big our gap of knowledge would be. We wouldn't understand what's going on. So we're looking at Peter's speech, and I think we ended with chapter 3, verse 21 last week, so we're going to pick up at verse 22. And this is just the ongoing part of Peter's speech. So chapter 3, verse 22. Moses said, "The Lord God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your brothers. You shall listen to him in whatever he tells you. And it shall be that every soul who does not listen to that prophet shall be destroyed from the people. And all the prophets who have spoken, from Samuel and those who came after him, also proclaimed these days. You are the sons of the prophets and of the covenant that God made with your fathers, saying to Abraham, and in your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. God, having raised up his servant, sent him to you first, to bless you by turning every one of you from your wickedness." Okay, so as part of his speech now, he addresses this issue of the prophet. Have you ever heard that? Remember when Jesus and the disciples were at Caesarea Philippi, and Jesus asked them, who do people say that I am? And they said, one of the prophets, or the prophet, or John the Baptist, or Elijah. I can't remember now. But when they say the prophet, what are they talking about? This prophet here, who was predicted by Moses. So that's worth taking a couple minutes to look up. So let's go back to the last book of Moses, the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 18. The final book of Moses, book of Deuteronomy. And in chapter 18, look with me at, well, actually, I'm going to start a little earlier than I planned. Look just very briefly at verse 10. "There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination, or tells fortunes, or interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or a charmer, or a medium, or a necromancer, or one who inquires of the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord." So, all kinds of magic and witchcraft and ways of trying to supernaturally or magically determine hidden knowledge, those things are an abomination to the Lord. I'm not trying to, this is not to make anybody upset or, I'm just trying to step on people's toes and the others. But this is why, like at Halloween, we as Christians don't put up like pictures of witches and
we don't?
like that. No, we don't. He walked in at just a moment. Now his heart is convicted. Because you don't play around with that stuff, right? If it's an abomination to the Lord, then you don't joke about it. You don't have fun with it. It's something we stay as far away from. And are you seeing more of it in our society?
Yes.
Oh, sure. I hate to say the Harry Potter series. When those first came out, we had debates in the church where I was. We had voters meetings where people got up, and I was getting up, and there were some on my side, and there were some on the other side, saying, we should not be supporting this. And other people are like, no, it's teaching the kids to read, and it's just good, wholesome stories and wonderful characters, and they love it. But we were right, because this is what the effect has been. It has changed our culture. That series was so popular, and so many people have read it now, that it changed our culture, and we have a whole generation of kids who think having a wand and doing magic is cool, right? So it's a bad thing for us as Christians. I forbid my kids to do it, and all their friends were doing it, and I'm such a softie. I was not a good father, really. I could have been better, because I just always give in. I never wanted the dogs on the bed, and after a couple of years, the dogs are sleeping on the bed. You know? So I eventually let the kids watch them, and I even watched them myself. But I do have to say, they are entertaining, and they're interesting characters and interesting plot lines. But as Christians, something should always bother us about it, because this is prohibited. But it's in the light of, well, okay, now go down to verse 13. You shall be blameless before the Lord your God, for these nations which you are about to dispossess listen to fortune tellers and to diviners. But as for you, the Lord your God has not allowed you to do this. So part of the reason the Canaanites were going to be destroyed and kicked out of their land, and that land given to Israel, is because they had sinned against God by following these fortune tellers. Now, instead of fortune tellers, then, how are the Israelites to know the truth? How are they supposed to know? He tells us, verse 15. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your brothers. It is to him you shall listen, just as you desired of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, or see this great fire any more, lest I die. And the Lord said to me, they are right in what they have spoken. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. And whoever will not listen to my words that he shall speak in my name, I myself will require it of him. So God is promising that he will raise up people like Moses, who will be given the word of the Lord that they can give to the people. And I think there's two dimensions to this. One is that there would be this succession of prophets. So we see God raising up prophets over the course of Israel's history. For example, Peter mentioned it here in Acts 3. Samuel, right? Samuel was a prophet. So when they needed to know what the Lord was saying, God would tell Samuel. But there's also, there's a sense in this in which there is the prophet with a definite article, capitalized in bold. The idea that there would be one prophet in particular who would rise up above all the rest, who would be the special, unique prophet that through whom God would speak. And you can see this development already when you look, for example, at Elijah. Because the greatest prophet of the Hebrews was Moses. But when you look at the prophet Elijah kind of did everything that Moses did. And I think that's intentional in the story. It's the Bible's way of saying Moses was here, and then you've got all these other prophets, but you've also got Elijah. Guess what? He's here too. And so it carries on this idea that there's going to be this one great prophet. Well, then the prophetic view of history is that what God has done in the past, God continues to do in the future. So in the future, who is this one great prophet going to be? Well, Peter is identifying him in our Acts chapter 3 text as Jesus. Jesus is the one who fulfills this. Jesus is the second Moses, only he's greater than Moses. And his word is required of the people, that they must listen to it, because through him God speaks. Very, very important. Okay, Acts chapter 3. I'm back in Acts 3 again. In verse 24, all the prophets and Samuel, and they all proclaimed these days. What are these days? What days are they talking about? These days when the Christ would come, and when the promise of refreshing was going to come, meaning the Messianic kingdom was going to be inaugurated, was going to be fulfilled when when this, our Old Testament text today, from Isaiah, was that not an awesome text? Is that, when you read that, doesn't it? That's just like incredible. The lions are going to eat straw. So they're going to, there could literally be lions in heaven. I kind of hope there are, because I like lions. I like tigers, right? But it could be, it could be a metaphorical way of saying that just as, there were lions in that day in Israel. Today they're confined to small areas of Africa, but back in those days, lions' habitat stretched all the way from Assyria down throughout Africa. Right? So they would have seen lions. They would have known lions. They would have known stay away from lions. Is that a way of saying, in the fulfillment of the kingdom, there's nothing that can harm you. There's no danger. It talks about the infant crawling, and he sticks his hand in the hole where there's a nest of poisonous snakes. And what does he do? Pulls his hand back out again and keeps crawling, right? It's a way of saying that everything will be at perfect harmony and peace. That's the way it was in the Garden of Eden before Adam sinned, right? There was nothing that could harm you. Sin is what brought about danger and death and harm and hurt. There's not going to be any of that in the...
Can I ask a question about that Isaiah passage?
Yeah.
It says that there's going to be infants that are nursing, infants that are weaned. Where do these children come from? Are they the aborted babies, or babies, or people that die as little, and that means there's going to be
that's a
babies, or this is something we don't know about?
That's a good question. Gilbert Melander, who is a really marvelous conservative Lutheran bioethicist, he talks about how Christians have always wondered, what age will you look like when you are in heaven? Will we all be little kids again? Or will we be like kind of at the prime of our physicality, like maybe 23 years old, when I was a better specimen than I am now? Or will we look like the age we are when we died on earth? And his answer, I think, is very profound, is that the Bible really doesn't address that. And you know why? Because it doesn't matter. What we're going to experience in that kingdom is greater than we can imagine or conceive. So if we can think about it and think we've got, okay, you're going to be this age, or you're going to be that age, then we're falling short. We haven't captured. So that's a great question, because that's one reason why I think that Isaiah passage is intended to be metaphorical. That it's not that we're going to have these little babies. It's a way of describing the perfect existence, right? People of all ages in perfect harmony, babies being what God intended that they should be, little children being what God intended they should be, the grown-ups being what God intended they should be, nature being what God intended it should be, all coming together in perfect fulfillment. Now, if I'm wrong, and there are babies and lions and snakes in heaven, okay. But that's, my suspicion is that it's a way of describing something that defies human imagination. It's going to be so awesome. And so that's the time of refreshing that's going to be inaugurated, that has been inaugurated by Christ and will be consummated when Christ comes back again. That's the days that he's talking about. Did I touch on it, Mike, enough, or do you want to say some more about it?
No, saying it was a metaphor is enough.
Okay. So, sorry.
Well, there are the rest of us here. Need that.
Okay, verse 25. I'm back in Acts 3:25. You are the sons of the prophets and of the covenant that God made with your fathers. All right, so he's directly identifying them as being in line with God's salvific works throughout history. That God has not dealt with everybody the same. We like to think, oh, God loves all people the same, and well, at least in terms of his dealings with people, he has not dealt with all people the same. He chose a nation, and they were his select people out of all the nations of the world. That's why I think Christians should never be anti-Semitic or hate Jews or something like that. Now, their religion apart from Christ is false now. Apart from Christ, you cannot be saved. But Christians should be the last ones to be harming and running down Jews, because it is through them that God's covenants have come. It's confirmed right here, right? And it's part of the covenant that God made with their fathers, including Abraham. And you see the little quotation there. And in your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Now, that seems to be a calculation of actually a couple different promises God made to Abraham that Peter's kind of conflating here together. So let's go to the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 12. Genesis 12, verses 2 and 3. So this is the initial covenant that God is making with Abram. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and make your name great, so that, why is God blessing them? So they could just be happy and have fun, have great times together. No, there's a reason for this. So that you will be a blessing. So the purpose of God blessing Abraham and blessing Israel was so that they in turn would become a blessing to others. Verse 3, I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So all the families, does that mean the Kelm family? Does that mean the Oswald family? Yes. All the families of the earth will be blessed in Abraham and in the Jews. Well, why and how is that?
Because of the Christ.
Yes, because through them eventually comes the Christ. So it's God's big scheme and all of his activities throughout history to eventually bring the Christ. And in the Christ, he brings the blessings to all the rest of us. Now flip back to Genesis 22. Genesis 22. And let's just look at verse 18. Well, let's look at 17 while we're there too. All right, this is God speaking to Abraham. I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So it's his promise that Abraham is going to have, it translates it here as offspring. You could translate it as his seed. His seed is going to be so numerous that it's going to be more than the stars in the sky, more than the sand on the seashore. And in his offspring, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. So all the families of the earth, we read in chapter 12, are going to be blessed through Abraham. Here in chapter 22, we read all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed, but through Abraham's offspring. Well, who is that offspring? Singular. Who would that be? That's the Christ, yeah. Right? That's the seed. And so through Christ, everyone's going to be blessed. So now back in Acts 3:25, look at that quote again. And in your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So you see how he's putting those two together? The families being blessed, that was from Genesis 12. Being blessed through the offspring, that was Genesis 22. So Peter's kind of conflating these two verses into one promise that was made to Abraham. But the promise made to Abraham is blessing, and the promise is that the blessing comes through the offspring. And Peter is saying here, who is that offspring? It's Christ. Look at verse 26. God having raised up his servant. So that's the servant. That's the one that is bringing the blessing. And verse 26, he sent him to you first. So to whom was Jesus sent in ministry first? The Jews, right. Do you remember the incident where, is it the Syrophoenician woman? I think so. So a non-Jewish woman comes to him and wants him to heal her daughter. And remember what Jesus said? It is not right to take the children's bread and give it to the dogs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Meaning, I'm going to get myself in trouble here. Somebody showed me something on Facebook. I'm not on Facebook, thank God. And somebody had posted something about love your neighbor. When Jesus said love your neighbor, it means loving the people who are not of your race and not of your, and don't love the same kind of people you love, meaning gays, right? It's kind of this fancy thing. That's what Jesus meant by love your neighbor. And I told Dawn, I said, I'm going to write, people who don't believe like you. So I said, I'm going to write them back and say, if that's what Jesus meant, tell me why Jesus called people who don't believe like him, the Sadducees, you brood of vipers. And tell me why Jesus called this woman who was of a different race than him a dog. Right? And I had this long thing I was going to write back, and Dawn said, don't do that. And she pulled me back from getting into an argument with someone, which was a good thing. So why does Jesus call this woman a dog? Which is not a compliment, by the way. Right? Why does Jesus do that?
Because she's not one of the
Because
children.
she's not one of the chosen. She's not a Jew.
Yeah.
Now, Jesus' ministry is always with a view toward the fact that the Gentile mission is going to take place. That's what we're going to read about in the book of Acts. The book of Acts is going to be all about how the ministry is to the Jews, but as they reject the gospel, the ministry then goes to the Gentile world. That was God's plan all along. But that was his purpose. Go to Romans chapter 1. Romans 1. Take a look at verse 16. Romans 1:16. This is Paul writing. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. So there's a sense in which the gospel is for everyone. And the promise of the gospel accrues to all who hear the gospel and believe the gospel. But look at this, what he says now. He qualifies it. To the Jew first, and also to the Greek. So it goes to the Jew first, and then to the Greek. By the way, we're the Greeks. It's Gentiles. So you only got two races if you're Jewish, right? You've got us and everybody else.
Okay.
The Jews and the Gentiles, the Greeks. Now, I always took that as being chronological. That in the flow of history, God brought the gospel and salvation, the promise of salvation, first to the Jews. All 12 of the disciples were Jews, right? Jesus' ministry was to the Jews. And it was only when the Jews rejected that then the gospel went out to the Gentiles. So I always saw it as chronological. There was a pastor in in St. Paul, Minnesota, when I was a pastor up in Minnesota, and he was a really good guy. I liked him so much. And he had a ministry. What was the name of that? Oh, I think it might have been Good News for Israel, or something like that. And he did like a little newsletter, and he talked about these kinds of themes and subjects out of the Bible. And his focus was trying to bring the gospel to Jewish people. So here's this German Lutheran. And German Lutherans, oh, now I'm over time. Can I just keep going till the kids come out? German Lutherans, we've got to tread lightly when we're sharing the gospel with Jews, because Martin Luther, toward the end of his life, he was getting sick. His 14-year-old daughter had died. He had had a lifetime of struggling with the Catholics and struggling with the Schwärmerei, and he got attacked from every side, and he kind of went off the deep end. And right before he died, he wrote this thing called on the Jews and their lies. And he wrote this thing, and he said, Jews have rejected the gospel, so we should burn down their synagogues, and we should take all of their stuff from them, and we should beat them and kick them out of our cities. And Adolf Hitler, of course, he went to town with that, right? So when Lutherans want to talk to Jews who know about that are rightfully suspicious, right? We all denounced that. We all know that was wrong. But what this pastor did, was he said, I don't think that to the Jew first and also to the Greek is only a chronological observation. He thinks it's also an evangelism priority. He said, if you want to have success reaching the Gentiles, share the gospel with the Jews that you know first. And so that was what he tried to do. And I don't know if he was right, but all these decades later, I still think about that. I think he might have been onto something. And we have seen in our time, my mom, who made, I don't know how many trips, a dozen trips to Israel in her lifetime, she talks about the first time she went there, and there were only 2 Messianic Jewish Christian congregations. That's Christian churches made up of people who were ethnically Jewish, that had become Christian. She said by the last time that she went there were 40. In other words, Jewish people have been becoming in the last 60 years more and more receptive to Christianity, to the gospel. So does that mean something, for the end times, or who knows? But it's a very fascinating observation. So here in Acts, end of chapter 3, Peter's telling them right up front, Jesus was sent to you first. And why? To bless you by turning every one of you from your wickedness. It's a message of repentance that I talked about earlier. How does the blessing come? When we're given an opportunity and an occasion to turn from our wickedness and turn toward Christ in faith. Okay, the kids are still in there.
They will peek at home.
No, okay. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. Wait a minute. All right, so next week we'll start chapter 4. But here's the interesting thing I want to point out from chapter 4. Wait a minute if they stick their heads out. Don't. But Peter and John get arrested and they get hauled in to talk to the Sanhedrin and the Sadducees. The Sadducees didn't believe any of this stuff. So that's why this becomes more fascinating, because all these things Peter's talking about are all things that directly undercut the false doctrine of the Sadducees. It's going to be fascinating when you see this. So thank you all for coming today and your patience.